Today we're unboxing an iPhone 5S that should be running its original software version, iOS 7. I picked this up on eBay for a really good deal. It was only $29.99 plus shipping. Let's go ahead and get it opened up. And here we have the iPhone. This is in the space gray color. The condition looks pretty good so far here on the back. I am seeing maybe a minor dent in the aluminum right here. And here on the front of the device, it looks to be in really great condition. Really, I'm only seeing some minor scratches on the glass. The corners on this iPhone also look really good. I don't see any dents or major nicks. Let's see if it has any battery power. And it looks like it does. And perfect, the device boots into the iOS 7 slide to unlock screen. So let's do that now. And perfect, the device is definitely running iOS 7 at this point. One of the biggest giveaways that this is iOS 7 is this passbook icon, as it only features 3 rows. Starting in iOS 8, the passbook icon had 4 rows with a red card row across the top. Let's jump into settings so we can see which version of iOS 7 we have. Okay, and it looks like we have 7.1.2 here. We can also see that this is a base model 16GB storage configuration. And this iPhone did not include the original box, but I still wanted to show you what would have come with that. So the device would sit here on the top in a little tray, and under that tray is a literature packet. That includes a quick start guide, some warranty info, as well as 2 Apple stickers. And you were really taken care of in the accessories department with your iPhone 5S. You had a set of wired earpods complete with remote and mic. And they also included this really nice plastic carrying case. You had a small 5-watt power adapter, as well as your Lightning to USB cable. I connected this iPhone to a Mac and used the application called Coconut Battery to get some more details about it. And according to that, the production date for this device was in August 2014. So that definitely means this was one of the last iPhone 5S models to be made that still ran iOS 7, as Apple launched the iPhone 6 with iOS 8 the following month in September. The Coconut Battery application also revealed that this iPhone has really great battery health. It was rated at 97.5% with only 1 charge cycle. So now let's talk about what this iPhone 5S was. It was released in September 2013 as the successor to the 2012 iPhone 5. The iPhone 5S shared its design with the iPhone 5. So you still had the 4-inch display with the aluminum and glass design. When the iPhone 5S was released, the iPhone 5 before it was actually discontinued. At the time, Apple had historically kept the previous year's iPhone for sale just at a discounted price. So the replacement for that slot under the iPhone 5S was the new iPhone 5C. And the term new for the iPhone 5C is a bit ironic, as it really was pretty much identical to the iPhone 5 internally. It was just now in this plastic shell. The iPhone 5S launched at a price of $649, and this iPhone 5C below it was only $100 cheaper at $549. And the iPhone 5C really goes down as being one of the worst iPhones ever made, while the iPhone 5S is much more highly regarded. It received 2 new color options, first of which was this space gray color like I have here. This replaced the darker slate color that you could get on the iPhone 5. The space gray was a much lighter, more silvery finish, but it definitely held up better than the slate. As you can see here, the slate color was pretty much painted on the aluminum and it had a really bad tendency to chip off. There was also a very elusive gold color for this iPhone 5S. Unfortunately, I do not have one of those in my collection, but you could definitely say that gold was the halo color for this device. It was Apple's first flagship iPhone to be offered in any color other than white or black. One of the biggest selling features for the iPhone 5S was the Touch ID sensor, and that was the fingerprint sensor on the home button of the device. It could be used for not only unlocking your device, but also making iTunes and App Store purchases as well. Touch ID really helped iPhone users save time. So let's demo that Touch ID sensor now. It was really easy to set up, either during the initial setup for your device or here in settings. You would simply rest your fingerprint on the home button repeatedly for the device to get a scan of it. I remember back in 2013 when this came out thinking this was the coolest thing ever. So I'll show you the comparison with unlocking these devices with Touch ID versus a passcode. And yeah, that pretty much speaks for itself how incredible Touch ID is and was. There were also a ton of other new features for the iPhone 5S model. There was the new 64-bit A7 processor. And at the time, it was really incredible to have a 64-bit chip in a smartphone. It was quoted to be 2 times faster than the previous A6 chip in CPU and GPU. There were also some really nice upgrades to the camera. So you'll see the sensor itself looks a little bit different on the 5S. There was no longer this metal ring around the camera, as the 5S had a larger f2.2 aperture versus the f2.4 on the iPhone 5. The 5S still had an 8 megapixel camera, but it had some really cool new features. It could record slow-mo video with 720p at 120 FPS. And you could also take a bunch of photos at once with the new burst mode. And there was now a new dual-tone amber and white flash Apple referred to as a true tone flash. The iPhone text on the 5S was much thinner to be in line with the font on iOS 7. You could get the 5S with 16, 32, or 64 gigabytes of storage. And it was sold until March 2016 when it was replaced with the first generation iPhone SE. The iPhone 5S launched with some really nice leather cases. I'm thinking this blue case will look really nice on this iPhone, especially with the iOS 7 default wallpaper. And there we go, yeah, this is looking incredible. I love how with this case you can still see the space gray aluminum shine through on the edges of the device. So now we'll talk about iOS 7 on this device specifically. And you really can't understate the importance of iOS 7, as this was the biggest visual change to iOS ever. And I think now is an especially good time to take a look at iOS 7, as we just had the announcement of iOS 26 at WWDC 2025. And that version brings the next big visual design change to iOS. So it's pretty crazy to think that the basic design iOS 7 put into place was used through 12 versions, with iOS 7 here through iOS 18. And while the new iOS 26 is using a liquid glass design, you could say that iOS 7 was using a flat, modern, and colorful design. And nowhere is that more clear than comparing it to the previous version, iOS 6. So the design philosophy for iOS 6 was known as skeuomorphism, and essentially that means that these digital elements mimic real-life ones. So like the settings show actual gears, the newsstand shows actual bookshelves, the game center here has felt and wooden details, and the examples of that could really go on forever. It's pretty interesting though, because Apple does seem to be sprinkling a little bit of skeuomorphism back in with iOS 26. It really caught my eye that the camera icon in iOS 26 mimics this iOS 6 one. Aside from the visual changes, iOS 7 had some nice functional improvements too. Most notably, we now had a control center. So you could use this to make really quick and easy changes. I think one of the most useful features in here was the brightness slider as well as the flashlight shortcut. Previously in iOS 6, you would have to go all the way into a menu in settings to change your brightness. And you also needed a separate app for a flashlight. The multitasking view in iOS 7 got a major redesign. You now had full screen previews of the application window, and closing them out was as simple as swiping upward. This was a lot less intuitive in iOS 6. The multitasking interface was really small and only gave you a preview of the app icon. Closing them out was also difficult, as you would have to hold down and press these really small red minus buttons. There was also this really nice swipe back feature in iOS 7. The swipe back feature was not only more fun to use, but it just made everything feel quicker. And this is a really small detail, but the hands on the iOS 7 clock now moved according to the actual time. Previously with iOS 6, the clock was just always stuck at 10:15. iOS 7 had this really nice parallax effect to the home and lock screen. And with that, basically the wallpaper would move to make it appear that the text and other items were floating. So it made for a really nice 3D effect. iOS 7 got a new charge sound. Here's what it sounded like with iOS 6. iOS 7 also had new ringtones and text tones. I remember when these first came out, they sounded so much more modern than what iOS 6 had. Other features new for iOS 7 included AirDrop, iCloud Keychain, as well as the controversial activation lock. Let's take a look at the default wallpaper selection here on iOS 7. First, you have this new dynamic category, and these were basically dots that would move according to the tilt of your device. You also had a selection of stills that were pretty much all new. Of course, the blue space wallpaper here was the default. You had a couple more space options as well as many nature choices. And the wallpaper selection here on iOS 7 is probably one of my favorites, second only to iOS 8. For whatever reason, I have always been obsessed with this wooden design wallpaper. And there were some more abstract, colorful wallpapers here near the bottom. I did want to touch on some quirks that only applied to the early versions of iOS 7. So these changes apply to the versions 7.0 through 7.0.6. And they were changed in 7.1 and newer. So in the 7.0 versions, the phone, messages, and FaceTime icons were a much more neon green color. In 7.1 and newer, they were a darker green. There were also different animations between these versions. So I'll show you here by opening settings that the animation is much faster on 7.1 and newer. And opening the control center also had a different animation. So on the 7.0 versions, you'll see that it kind of just slowly wafts upward, while on the 7.1, it comes up and bounces a bit. The 7.0 versions also had these really large rectangular buttons in the phone app. That also applied to the slide to power off screens. And using these sliders had different animations. You can see on the 7.0 version, the slider kind of went in toward the cancel button. And there was really not much of an animation on 7.1 and newer, it just kind of faded out. Here in 2025, there isn't a ton you can still do with iOS 7. The App Store will pull up some content, but it will not allow you to actually log in and download an application. You could jailbreak the device though and sideload applications. Siri actually still works here on iOS 7, so let's try that out now. What's up?
Hello, how can I help?
But that pretty much concludes my look at this iPhone 5S running iOS 7.1.2. I will admit I'm really dying to get my hands on one of these in the gold color option, but I'm still really grateful to have another space gray model here. Be sure to get subscribed if you're interested in seeing more legacy iOS devices running their original software versions. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.